There is a soft pink rock t-shirt folded away in Princess Bubblegum's room, a shirt that was never really hers to begin with, and in one quiet episode you get to watch the most rational person in all of Ooh hold it up to her face and breathe it in like it is the last surviving piece of something she lost. This is a woman who calls magic nothing more than scientific principles, dressed up as mystical hoodoo, a woman who will do arithmetic on living people without so much as a flinch, a woman who built an entire civilization out of first principles because the alternative was being alone, and she kept the shirt. Tonight we are going through all of it, the whole strange mind of Bonnibel Bubblegum, the loneliness under the science, the quiet cruelty under the crown, and the love she very nearly lost to her own to-do list. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it honestly helps us keep making these. Let me start with what she is actually made of, because it explains almost everything that comes after. If you stand in front of Princess Bubblegum and look at her the way you would look at any character in a cartoon, you see a young woman, pink from head to toe, maybe 18 or 19, tall and composed and a little severe, dressed like royalty. That is the surface, and the surface is a lie of sorts, not a malicious one, just a body doing what her body does. Underneath the appearance, she is not a young woman at all. She is candy biomass, a living mass of gum that can deform and reform, lose a limb and grow it back, dissolve under enough force and be poured together again. Her shape is a decision, not a fact. And the number the show and its sources put on her age, when it puts one at all, is over 8 centuries. You will see the figure 827 attached to her, and it gets cited so often it almost feels official. But the series itself is deliberately cagey about the exact count, so the honest way to say it is simply that she is old, older than the kingdom she rules, old enough that she has watched the world change several times over. Here is the piece of her biology that I find genuinely clarifying, because it takes something that sounds like magic and turns it into cold chemistry. Her apparent age is a function of her mass. The more candy biomass she is carrying, the older and taller she looks, and if you take that mass away, she gets younger, physically, in real time. This is not a metaphor the show gestures at. It happens on screen. After she is possessed by the Lich in the arc around an episode called Mortal Recoil, the Ice King's freezing is what finally drives the Lich out of her, but the process leaves only enough of her substance behind to reform as a 13-year-old. She does not choose that. There simply is not enough of her substance left to be anything larger. And then in the episode Too Young, she rebuilds herself back up to her adult self, restores the mass, restores the age. Think about what that means for her sense of self. For a person like this, immortality is not a soul that persists. It is not a spirit that refuses to die. It is just chemistry she can re-pour. She is a formula that keeps its notes. When people talk about the philosophy of Princess Bubblegum, they usually start with her politics or her science. But I think you have to start here, with the fact that her body is an editable document, because a person who can literally rewrite her own physical age is going to think about time and permanence and what a life is worth, very differently from you or me. Where did she come from then, if she was never born the way you were born? The show's answer shifted over its run, and the shift is worth naming plainly because it is one of the quiet retcons the series performs on its own lead. In the early years, the impression you got was of a science-made ruler, a princess who was in some sense the product of her own laboratory, the mad genius who happens to wear a crown. Later, in the episodes that fill in her deep past, the origin gets reframed into something stranger and older. She and her brother came out of a thing called mother gum, an enormous pink sentient mass of gum that formed in the poisoned years after the Mushroom War, the nuclear apocalypse that ended the age of humans. Bonnibel and Neddy essentially dropped out of that hive of gum, the way fruit drops from a tree, into an empty and ruined world. So she is not a lab experiment after all. Or not only that, she is something closer to a natural phenomenon that woke up with a mind. The wasteland grew her. That detail, that she is a child of the ruins, matters more than it first appears, because the Candy Kingdom she would go on to build is not sitting on neutral ground. It is built on humanity's grave. The pastel towers, the gumdrop hills, the cheerful little citizens shaped like sweets, all of it stands on the ashes of the world that killed itself. The opening titles tell you this if you are paying attention, and I want to be accurate about what it actually shows. because people misremember it constantly. The title sequence does not open on a battlefield of skulls and broken weapons the way fans sometimes describe it. It opens on a devastated gray wasteland with a rat sheltering inside the shell of a broken television and undetonated bombs still half buried in the dirt. And then the camera pulls back and up and away from all that ruin to reveal the bright-colored land of Ooh. That is its whole thesis in about 10 seconds. The sweetness is real, and it is sitting directly on top of the horror, and the horror never went anywhere. Bubblegum is the person who chose to build the sweetness anyway. The sunniest kingdom in the world, raised by hand over the bones of the old one. There is one more layer to what she is, revealed late, and it recontextualizes her science with something almost mythic. In the arc called Elements, Bubblegum learns, or has forced upon her, the truth that she is the candy elemental, the living incarnation of candy itself, one of 4 elemental forces that structure the whole universe of Ooh. The 4 are fire, ice, slime, and candy. She is not merely made of candy, she is candy. In the way fire is fire, an embodiment of a principle rather than a creature that happens to be built from a material. And the series does something clever with this, which is that the 4 elements map neatly onto the 4 classical temperaments from ancient and medieval medicine. The old idea that a personality is really an imbalance of humors in the body. Fire lines up with the choleric temperament, the angry and driven one. Ice lines up with the melancholic, the sorrowful one, which is almost too perfect for the Ice King. Slime lines up with the phlegmatic, the calm and sluggish one. And candy lines up with the sanguine temperament, the joyful, social, optimistic one. So on the level of ancient personality theory, Bubblegum is joy itself, sweetness itself, the element of the happy and the bright, which makes what the Elements arc does to her all the more disturbing, because when patient St. Pym forces her to become the candy elemental fully and without restraint, the result is not warmth. It is a whole population made mindlessly, sinisterly blissful, her citizens smiling with nothing behind their eyes. Joy turned all the way up until it becomes a kind of death. Her defining nature, care and sweetness and the desire to make people happy, taken to its logical extreme, produces a horror. Hold on to that, because it is the shape of nearly every moral problem she has. The best thing about her, followed all the way to the end of its own logic, becomes the worst. So that is the material she is made of. A body that is really a document she can edit. An age measured in the poundage of her own gum. A birth out of a sentient mass that formed in a nuclear wasteland. A kingdom raised on the grave of the human race. And underneath all of it, the revelation that she is not just a clever woman who rules candy people. She is candy, the element itself. Joy given a mind and a crown, and 800 years to figure out what to do with them. Everything else we talk about tonight, the science, the surveillance, the creations, the loneliness, the love, is really about one being trying to work out what a person who cannot properly die owes to the fragile, mortal, breakable creatures she chose to surround herself with. And to understand why she surrounded herself with them at all, you have to go back to the emptiness she started in, and to a story that is, underneath everything, not about power at all. It is about a child who could not stand being alone. Picture the world she woke up into. None of what she will later build exists yet. There is only a ruined gray landscape and a very young gum being who has just become aware, and the only other soul she has is her brother. That brother is Neddy, and I want to describe him accurately because he gets garbled in almost every retelling. Neddy is not a tree, and he is not some vague plant creature. He is a gum dragon, a shy, skittish, easily terrified being, with small bat-like wings and a tail, who feeds on the roots of a candy tree and mostly wants to hide from everything. He is her family, the one thing in the wasteland that is truly hers, and he is also fundamentally unable to be a companion in the way she needs, because he is frightened of the world and will not engage with it. So you have a bright, curious, capable young mind, freshly awake, in an empty, poisoned world, with one relative who cannot bear to come out of hiding. That is the emotional starting condition of the mightiest ruler in Ooh. Not ambition, loneliness, a specific, aching, childhood loneliness with nowhere to put itself. What she does about it is the single most important thing to understand about her, and it is, for my money, the perfect thesis for anyone trying to describe her philosophy, because it reframes her entire kingdom. She does not conquer anyone, and she does not inherit a throne. What she does instead is take pieces of gum and use a life-giving device on them, and out of that she makes people. One by one, the candy people come into being, a whole population of small, sweet citizens, so that she will not be alone. And she does not stop at subjects. There is a family too, an uncle, Gumbald, an aunt, Lolly, and a cousin, Chicle, all created deliberately, out of the same loneliness, because a brother who hides and a crowd of simple citizens is still not the thing a person actually longs for, which is family that can look back at you as an equal. This is revealed in the episode that carries her own name, Bonnibel Bubblegum, deep in the later run of the show, and it lands like a key turning in a lock, because once you know it, every single thing about her rule reads differently. Every subject she governs is, at bottom, a cure she built for her own solitude. She is not a queen who acquired a people. She is a lonely person who manufactured company and then had to become responsible for it. The Candy Kingdom is a founding story, but it is not a conquest. It is a loneliness story, wearing a crown. This is where the tragedy that shadows her whole character begins, because the family she made to cure her loneliness is exactly what turns on her. She and Gumbald did not agree about how the new world should be run. She wanted one thing, he wanted another, and the disagreement curdled into something that could not be talked out. Now, the way this gets told secondhand is almost always wrong, and it is wrong in a way that makes her look far more monstrous than she is. So let me lay out what actually happens on screen, because it matters for judging her. The mind-erasing substance in this story, the dum-dum juice, also called happy juice, was not her weapon. It was Gumbald's invention. Gumbald is the one who used it. He tricked Lolly and Chicle into eating cupcakes laced with the juice, and it turned them into simpler candy folk, the ones the audience had known for years as Manfred and Crunchy, without ever suspecting who they used to be. Then Gumbald tried to force Bonnibel to drink it too, to erase her, and she defended herself. Armed with a pea shooter, she shot the beaker he was holding, and the juice splashed back onto Gumbald's own face, wiping his mind, regressing him into a simple candy citizen with no memory of who he had been. This was not a woman going around methodically erasing her enemies. She was nearly the victim of the very thing that took him, and it took him by accident, in the moment he was trying to destroy her. The reason that distinction matters so much is that it is the difference between a tyrant and a survivor. If she had invented a mind-wiping serum and used it to neutralize dissent, she would be a straightforward villain, and the story would be a much simpler and much smaller thing. Instead, the ugliest founding act of her kingdom is something that happened to her, that she survived by reflex, and that she then had to carry for 800 years. Because the consequence is coldly appalling when you follow it through. Gumbald did not die. He became furniture, in effect. And for seasons and seasons, long before any of us knew the backstory, there was a talking bowl of fruit punch sitting in the background of the Candy Kingdom, a minor recurring gag character the fans knew as Punchy, or Punch Bowl. That bowl of punch was Gumbald. Her uncle, dumb juiced into a piece of set dressing, had been sitting silently in the background of her life the entire time. It is one of the longest planted retcons Adventure Time ever pulled off, and it retroactively poisons every cheerful crowd scene, because somewhere in every one of them is the erased mind of the man she used to call family. There was even an offhand line seasons earlier, in a Susan Strong episode, about someone cutting down taffy trees, a throwaway complaint that turns out to have been the first breadcrumb of a rivalry the writers would not pay off for years. She has been living inside the wreckage of her own family the whole time, smiling for the citizens, running the kingdom, with the evidence sitting right there in the room. So consider the moral weather this creates around her. She built a family out of loneliness. The family split over how to use power. In the fight, she survived by turning her uncle into a thing. She has ruled ever since in the constant presence of what that fight cost, and she cannot undo it, because the mind is gone, there is no bringing it back. If you want to understand why she is the way she is, why she guards, why she plans, why she controls, why she keeps everyone at a careful distance, and treats trust as a liability, this is a large part of the answer. The first people she ever loved and made were also the first people to try to erase her. Her origin taught her, in the harshest possible way, that the beings you create to keep you company can grow up to become the ones who come for your throat. And she never fully unlearns that lesson. It sits underneath the surveillance, underneath the tight grip, underneath the paternalism, a founding wound that whispers that closeness is dangerous and that the only truly safe relationship is the one you can control. There is a sad little irony threaded through all of this too, which is her name, Bonnibel. It comes from the French, bon meaning good and belle meaning beautiful, related to the old Scots word bonny. Her name literally means good and beautiful. Whoever, in the fiction, gave a newly formed gum child that name was making a promise on her behalf, that she would be good, that she would be beautiful, that she would be the sweet and radiant thing her element implies. And she spends 800 years trying to be exactly that, the good and beautiful ruler, while doing a long series of hard, cold, ugly things in the name of keeping her people safe. The gap between the name and the deeds is the whole character. She is Bonnibel, good and beautiful, and she is also the person who turned her uncle into a punch bowl and never quite let herself grieve it. I think this is the thing almost nobody says clearly enough about her, so I will say it plainly. Princess Bubblegum gets read as cold, and she is capable of coldness, but the coldness is not her nature. It is a scar. It is what a warm, lonely, desperate child hardened into after her first attempt at love ended with her nearly being erased by the people she made to love her. Everything defensive in her, everything managerial, everything that keeps her from letting Marceline in for centuries, grows out of that garden of a founding. She learned, before she had even finished building her world, that the people you make can unmake you. So she made a lot of them, and she made most of them simple, and she watched all of them, always. Not because she is a tyrant at heart, because she was hurt at the very beginning, in the place where she was supposed to be safest, by the family she built with her own hands to keep from being alone in the dark. That is where the philosophy starts. Not with a theory of government, with a wound. If the wound is where her heart went, then reason is where she decided to live instead. And the clearest way to see the shape of Princess Bubblegum's mind is to watch how she reacts to magic, because Ooh is a world absolutely soaked in it, and she refuses, again and again, to grant it the dignity of being real. To her, magic is not a separate force in the universe. It is only scientific principles presented like mystical hoodoo, an insult she delivers with the flat confidence of someone who has done the reading. Everything the wizards and witches of Ooh treat as sacred and secret, she treats as physics they have not bothered to understand. In the stretch of the show set around Wizard City, this attitude gets her into open conflict with the whole magical community, and she does not soften it to keep the peace. She calls them ignorant, more or less to their faces, and refuses to apologize for it, because from where she stands, an apology would be a lie. She is not being rude for sport. She simply cannot pretend to respect a worldview she considers a failure of curiosity. If it works, there is a mechanism. If there is a mechanism, it can be studied. If it can be studied, it is science. There is no fourth category in her head labeled genuinely inexplicable, and she is not interested in building one. This is why so many people who write about Adventure Time reach for the word humanist when they describe it, and reach for bubblegum as its clearest example. This is a series with gods in it, or things that behave like gods, a chaos deity, a lord of the dead, a whole pantheon of cosmic powers, and yet its moral center is not devotion to any of them. Its moral center is people helping people, learning things, being kind, cleaning up their own messes, growing up. The series teaches science and empathy roughly in the same breath, and mostly leaves religion out of the frame, and if you had to point at one character who embodies that outlook, it is the pink woman in the lab coat who builds moral order out of first principles rather than receiving it from on high. She swears by no one. When the candy people invoke Globe, their vague sort of deity, she does not join in. She trusts what she can measure, and she extends care because she has decided that care is correct, not because anything commanded it. In a world where the supernatural is provably real and standing right in front of her, she remains a stubborn secular rationalist, and it clearly loves her for it even as it keeps setting traps for that certainty. Because there is one enormous, delicious irony sitting right at the center of her rationalism, and the series never lets her resolve it. Her most trusted servant, the aide who runs her household and stands closest to her ear, Peppermint Butler, is a practicing occultist. He deals in death magic, He has dealings in the land of the dead. He trades favors with dark powers. He is knee-deep in exactly the mystical hoodoo she claims does not exist. The rationalist queen's right-hand man is a sorcerer, and she either does not know or does not want to know. It is the perfect blind spot, and it is not an accident of the writing. It is a running joke it tells at her expense over and over. She has built her identity on the claim that there is no magic, only unexplained science, and the little peppermint standing loyally at her side is proof, every single day, that she is at minimum incomplete. I love that the writers do this to her, because it keeps her from becoming insufferable. She is right about a lot, she is not right about everything, and the evidence is close enough to touch. Her rationalism is not only a pose either, it comes with the receipts, and one of the receipts is language. Bubblegum is fluent in German, and she is fluent in Korean. The Korean specifically so that she can speak with Lady Rainicorn, who does not speak English, an act of considerate engineering applied to friendship. When she bursts into German, it is easy to assume it is just a cute flourish, gibberish for texture, but it is not. It actually means things, and the things it means are unexpectedly tender. By most accounts, one of her earliest German lines in the series simply says, "I am here. Ich bin here." And in one giddy moment, overwhelmed with happiness right before she faints, she cries out in German that she is so happy, she could, and then trails off, unable to finish the thought. Ich bin so glücklich. There is something quietly moving about that the coldest, most controlled character in the series keeps her most unguarded flashes of feeling in a second language most of her audience cannot understand. The English-speaking viewer only ever sees her composed. It is the German that leaks. Joy she cannot say in her ruling voice comes out in the language she learned for the pleasure of learning it. There is a thing people forget about her, filed under the same rationalist competence, which is that for all her intellect, she can also fight. There is a whole episode built around her and Lady Rainicorn trapped underground, and in it the Ice King's living, disembodied heart, a wretched little creature called Ricardio, tries to force her into marriage. She agrees to marry him on one condition, that he beats her in single combat, and then she proceeds to tear him apart with her bare hands. It is a startling scene the first time you see it, because you have spent so long thinking of her as the person who invents the weapon rather than the person who swings it. And here she is, calm and brutal, dismantling her attacker piece by piece. Her competence is physical as much as it is intellectual. She is not a fragile scholar who needs Finn and Jake to protect her. She is perfectly capable of protecting herself, and she chooses, most of the time, to rule through foresight instead, which is a different thing entirely from being unable to rule through force. You can even see this identity in its own development history, because the softer princess we know was not the original plan. In the early pitch materials for the series, Bubblegum was conceived as a millionaire nerd enthusiast, a character defined by scientific hobbies and endeavors rather than by fairy tale royalty. The mad scientist ruler predates the pretty princess. The lab came before the crown, in the writer's room as much as in her fictional life. When you know that, her whole design reads as a costume worn over an engineer. The gown and the tiara are the concession to the fairy tale genre it is parodying. The person inside them was always meant to be someone who would rather be at a workbench, sleeves rolled up, solving something. It also tells you why she is so uneasy in the ceremonial parts of ruling, the parties, the pageantry, the being adored. That is not what she is for. She tolerates the throne because the throne comes with a laboratory and a population to keep alive, and the keeping alive is the part she actually cares about. But I do not want to leave you with the impression that her rationalism is simply admirable, because the show is far more honest than that, and this is where the philosophy gets genuinely uncomfortable. A worldview that says everything is science, everything has a mechanism, everything can be measured and therefore managed, is a worldview that has a very hard time drawing a line around a person and saying, this one is not yours to optimize. If a citizen is a system, you can improve the system. If a mind is chemistry, you can adjust the chemistry. If magic is not sacred, then very little is sacred, and the danger of a person who believes nothing is sacred is that she may come to believe nothing is off limits, as long as the math works out. Her rationalism is the thing that lets her build a joyful civilization out of a nuclear wasteland. and it is also the thing that lets her put a camera in a friend's face and call it prudent. The same clarity that refuses to bow to false magic also refuses, sometimes, to bow to the simple, stubborn value of a single life that the numbers say is expendable. The reason we admire her mind and flinch at her choices is that they come from the same place. You do not get one without the other. So this is the second pillar of who she is, sitting right on top of the loneliness. She is a rationalist in a magical world, a humanist among gods, an engineer wearing a princess. She learned German for joy and Korean for a friend. She can talk her way through any problem or, if she has to, tear it apart with her hands. And she has decided, as a matter of principle, that there is no such thing as the inexplicable, only the not yet explained. It is a beautiful creed, and it has a blade in it, and it spends 10 seasons pressing on the place where the beauty and the blade meet, because the next question, the one her whole rationalist confidence walks straight into, is the oldest question in the book about people who create. If you can make life, and you believe life is just chemistry you understand, then what exactly do you owe the things you make? And Bubblegum, more than any character in Adventure Time, has to answer that question, because she has been making life since the very first episode, and it has been going wrong for her since the very first episode, too. The very first proper episode of Adventure Time is called Slumber Party Panic, and if you want to know how deep the creator and his creation's problem runs in this character, you only have to watch the opening minutes of it. Because the trouble in that episode is not a monster from outside, it is her. Bubblegum has invented a decorpsinator serum, a substance meant to raise the candy dead and bring them back young and healthy. A well-intentioned piece of resurrection science aimed at helping her people. The serum spills on the graves in the candy cemetery, and instead of gentle, healthy revival, it raises a horde of candy zombies, and the kingdom is suddenly under siege from its own dead. On day 1 of the entire series, before we know anything about her, the story we are told about Princess Bubblegum is a Frankenstein story. Her science, meant to give life and comfort, produces a shambling catastrophe she then has to contain. She is the series' Victor Frankenstein, and it tells you so in its opening chapter, long before it ever gets around to explaining who she is or where she came from. Watch what she does next, though, because it is even more revealing than the accident itself. Her instinct, faced with the zombie uprising, is not only to fix it, it is to hide it. She makes Finn swear what she calls a royal promise not to tell the other candy people what is happening, and her reasoning is chilling in how calm it is. The candy people, she explains, would flip out and explode if they knew. Now, that sounds like a figure of speech, and this is where the show does something so specific it is easy to miss. It is not a figure of speech. The candy people can literally flip out and explode. Their fragility is real biology in this world. Extreme panic can cause them to burst, to die, actually die, from fear. So her impulse to manage the information, to keep the frightening truth from the public for the public's own good, is not simple authoritarian secrecy. It is, in her mind, a safety measure. Panic is lethal to her citizens in the plainest biological sense, and so controlling what they know is, to her, indistinguishable from keeping them alive. That is the seed of everything. The very first thing we ever learn about how Princess Bubblegum governs is that she believes some truths will kill her people, and that it is therefore her job to decide which truths they get to have. Sit with how much of her whole reign is already present in that one pilot. She creates life. The creation goes wrong. She takes responsibility for cleaning it up, and she hides the mess from the people it endangers, because she has judged that they cannot handle it, and in this specific case she is not even wrong. It is all there, the creation, the failure, the responsibility, the information control, the paternalism that might actually be mercy. Every heavy thing the character will do over 10 seasons is prefigured in the first 20 minutes, and what makes it tragic, rather than merely villainous, is that the show keeps refusing to let her off the hook, and keeps refusing to fully condemn her in the same motion. She should not be raising zombies by accident and swearing children to secrecy. She also genuinely is trying to keep a fragile people from bursting in terror. Both of those are true at once, and the discomfort of holding them together is the actual experience of thinking hard about her. If Slumber Party Panic is the accident, then the Earl of Lemongrab is the character's deepest and most painful study of what it means to make a mind and then fail it. Lemongrab is a being she created. A sour, screeching, deeply wrong person, made as a kind of failsafe, an heir who could rule the kingdom if she ever could not. And something went wrong in the making of him. He is not happy. He is not well. He is a creature of rage and confusion and unbearable loneliness. And his signature scream, his catchphrase of unacceptable, is the sound of a being who finds his entire existence intolerable and cannot say why. She knows something went wrong. She admits it. And here is the part that damns her more quietly than any single cruel act. She left his authority intact, kept him as he was, and never took real responsibility for the fact that she brought a suffering person into the world, and then mostly kept her distance from him because he was difficult to be around. When she is temporarily de-aged and Lemongrab seizes the throne on the technicality that he is now older than she is, it plays as comedy, but underneath it is a child she failed showing up to collect on a debt she never paid. There is a later episode where her guilt over his loneliness finally moves her to act, and the action is so purely her that it hurts. She decides the cure for Lemongrab's isolation is to make him a companion, so she creates a second Lemongrab. Her answer to the suffering of the thing she made is to make another thing. It is engineering applied to a wound that is not an engineering problem, and it goes about as well as you would expect. I want to be precise about what the horror actually is, because it gets exaggerated and mangled in retellings. The nightmare is not Bubblegum absorbing her citizens into herself, which is a thing people say and which never happens. The nightmare is what the two Lemongrabs do together. Given her candy life-giving formula, the two of them overproduce lemon citizens, manufacturing life without limit, until the excess collapses into one grotesque giant, a sprawling lemon body with its organs spread through separate rooms of the castle. A creature the fans came to know by the name Lemon John. And later still, the original Lemongrab, in his hunger and his madness, eats his own duplicate. He absorbs the companion she made for him. The loneliness she tried to solve by manufacturing a friend ends with him consuming that friend and being lonelier and larger and more monstrous than before. Her fix made it worse. Her fixes often make it worse, because she keeps trying to solve problems of the soul with problems of the workbench. The real-world texture around Lemongrab makes him even more of a live wire, and it is worth knowing. His voice is provided by Justin Roiland, who would later go on to co-create Rick and Morty, and the role is physically punishing. According to the people who worked on the show, Roiland is often drenched in sweat after recording, because the screaming that defines the character is genuinely exhausting to produce. By most accounts, his design came together as a collaboration, with one artist sketching the figure and another shaping the clothes and the strange weapons. And there is a lovely small detail about the catchphrase itself. As some fans have pieced together, the storyboard artist who coined the word unacceptable for Lemongrab seems to have quietly retired it afterward, avoiding it in his own later episodes, as if he did not want to wear it out. He understood that a thing like that is powerful precisely because it is rationed. There is a whole philosophy of restraint in that decision, a maker choosing to protect his creation from overuse, which is, if you think about it, exactly the kind of care Bubblegum keeps failing to show the beings she makes. The writer protected Lemongrab's dignity better than his creator in the story ever did. Step back from the specific creatures and look at the pattern, because the pattern is the argument. Every sentient being she creates is created without consent, obviously, because that is the nature of creation. None of us consent to being born. But most parents are not also the designers of their child's entire mind and purpose. She is. She brings the candy people and Lemongrab and the rest into existence, and then she goes further than any parent can. She specifies them. She decides how smart they will be, what they will want, what they are for. And that godlike degree of authorship is exactly what makes her responsibility so total and her failures so damning. When a person you designed from scratch turns out to be miserable, you cannot fully blame the world, or bad luck, or their choices. You wrote them. Lemongrab's misery is, in a real sense, a design flaw, and she knows it, and she cannot fix it, and she cannot bring herself to unmake him, and so he goes on suffering and screaming in his lemon castle, a permanent monument to the truth that she is a maker of life, who has never once figured out how to make a life that is well. That is the Frankenstein weight she carries, and it is heavier than any crown. and it is entirely her own doing. There is one creation of hers that deserves its own chapter, because it is the closest the show ever comes to putting her political philosophy into a laboratory and running the experiment. Her name is Goliad. Bubblegum makes Goliad out of her own DNA, and the reasoning behind it is one of the frankest and most unsettling admissions the character ever makes. She reasons that she is mortal, she will not always be around, her people will outlive her, or could, and a kingdom of naive candy citizens with no one to guide them is, to her mind, a kingdom that will destroy itself. So she decides to grow a successor, a being made from her own substance, a psychic candy sphinx meant to rule after she is gone. It is the act of a leader thinking in centuries, planning her own obsolescence, trying to solve the problem of what happens to the people she loves when the person who has been holding everything together is finally not there. You can read it as noble, a ruler so committed to her subjects that she engineers their care for a future she will not live to see. And then she has to actually teach Goliad how to rule, and the lesson is where it all comes apart, and where the show stages a real debate in political theory disguised as a children's cartoon. Bubblegum tries to teach Goliad that the best way to lead is through compromise, and she reaches for an analogy to explain it: the bee and the flower. The idea is cooperation, mutual benefit, the bee and the flower each giving the other something they need, a model of power as a relationship of exchange rather than domination. It is a lovely little parable, and it is exactly the kind of thing you would want your benevolent successor to internalize. But Goliad, who is smarter and colder and more purely logical than her maker intended, looks at the parable and finds the flaw in it instantly. Goliad points out that the bee does not actually care about the flower. The bee is stronger. The bee can take what it needs and does not need the flower's cooperation, only its nectar. And so the whole framework of mutual benefit collapses the moment one party is powerful enough not to need the other. Why compromise with the weak when you can simply dominate them? That is Goliad's counter-argument, and it is devastating, because it is the logical conclusion of raw power thinking, and Bubblegum does not have a clean answer to it. What you are watching, in that exchange, is a real argument between two theories of authority, the cooperative and the dominative, and it is being conducted between a woman and the successor she built to think like her. Goliad is not wrong about the mechanics. If power is the only thing that matters, then the strong have no reason to care for the weak, and a ruler is just the strongest thing in the room. What Bubblegum was trying to pass on was the belief that a ruler should choose to care, should bind herself to compromise even when she does not have to, should treat the weakness of her people as a claim on her rather than a license over them. But she cannot fully justify that belief from the cold logic she raised Goliad on, because it is not, in the end, a logical belief. It is a moral one. It is a choice that reason alone does not force you to make. And Goliad, being pure reason without the wound underneath it, without the loneliness that taught Bubblegum why the weak matter, simply declines to make that choice. The successor built to carry her values inherits her intelligence and none of her heart, and turns tyrannical almost immediately. The way she solves the Goliad problem is itself a perfect little emblem of how she operates, because she does not undo her mistake, she counters it with another creation. She and Finn make a second Sphinx, Stormo. This one, grown from Finn's DNA rather than hers. Finn being the show's reservoir of instinctive goodness, the way Bubblegum is its reservoir of intellect. And Stormo does not defeat Goliad, does not destroy her, because Goliad essentially cannot be destroyed. Instead, Stormo locks Goliad in an eternal psychic duel, the two of them frozen forever on top of the Candy Kingdom, foreheads pressed together in a stalemate that will never end, each holding the other in check for all time. Goliad is contained, not cured. The mistake is not erased, it is managed, held in permanent tension by a second thing she had to build to answer for the first. And that, right there, is the recurring shape of her whole life. She cannot take her failures back. She can only stack a new creation on top of the old one to keep it from moving. The kingdom is dotted with the frozen consequences of her attempts to do good, each one held still by the next attempt. I find the Goliad story quietly heartbreaking for a reason that has nothing to do with the monster, which is that it is a story about a parent discovering that you cannot pass on the part of yourself that matters most. She could give Goliad her intelligence, her strength, her design. She could not give Goliad the reason she uses those things gently, because that reason is not in her DNA, it is in her history, in the specific pain of having been alone and having built a world so as not to be. Goliad was born powerful and unwounded, and an unwounded power has no reason to be kind. What Bubblegum learns, without ever quite saying it, is that her mercy is not a transferable technology. It came from her suffering, and you cannot engineer suffering into a successor, and even if you could, it would be a monstrous thing to do. So the plan to secure her people's future after her death fails at the root, because the thing she most wanted to leave them, her care, turns out to be the one thing she cannot manufacture. She can only be it, herself, for as long as she lasts. Notice how differently the series treats her when the perspective flips, when we stop seeing her as the maker and start seeing her as the thing other people are made by, because beyond the beings she deliberately creates, she is an icon that others build themselves around, sometimes for the worse. There is a strange, sad episode about a villain who takes on the identity of Princess Cookie, and by some fan accounts his whole broken life traces back to a single moment with Bubblegum from his childhood. As the story goes, he was a small cookie child in an orphanage who was visited by the princess, and she seems to have given him a kindly pat on the head, an ordinary gesture of royal warmth, and he took it as scorn. He read the condescension of the powerful into a moment she almost certainly meant with nothing but affection, and it curdled in him for years into a resentment that eventually made him a criminal. The point it is making is delicate, and it is important. Bubblegum the icon, the perfect unreachable princess up on her balcony, can wound people simply by being unreachable. She does not have to do anything cruel. Her mere existence as an ideal, adored and distant, can be the thing that breaks somebody, because ideals are screens that people project their own wounds onto. Her responsibility does not stop at the beings she deliberately makes. She is, in a more diffuse and unfair way, entangled with everyone who has ever made something painful out of her image. Put those two things side by side, the creator and the icon, and you get the full weight of what it means to be Princess Bubblegum. Below her, the creatures she designed, each one a responsibility she can never put down. Around her, the citizens who worship an idealized version of her that no real person could ever be, some of them wounded by the very perfection they imagine. She is answerable in both directions at once, downward to the things she made, and outward to the people who made her into a symbol, and she cannot fully control either. Goliad shows her that she cannot pass on her goodness. Princess Cookie shows her that she cannot control what her goodness looks like from below. And in both cases, the lesson is the same uncomfortable one, that being powerful and being adored does not make you understood, and that the gap between what you intend and what the world does with it only grows wider the higher up you sit. She built a whole civilization to keep from being alone, and one of the ironies she has to live inside is that being at the top of it is one of the loneliest positions a person can occupy. Now we come to the coldest room in the house, the part of her thinking that makes people who love this character go quiet for a second, because there is an episode that takes her utilitarian mind and stages it as cleanly as any philosophy seminar ever could. The episode is called James, and the situation is a trolley problem made flesh. Bubblegum, Finn, Jake, and a candy citizen named James are trapped, surrounded by ooze zombies, and someone has to die so the others can escape. Finn, being Finn, volunteers. He offers his own life without hesitation, because that is who he is. And Bubblegum knocks him out. She physically knocks the hero unconscious, so that he cannot sacrifice himself, and then she sends James, the ordinary candy citizen, to die in his place. Her reasoning is not cruelty. Her reasoning is arithmetic. Candy citizens can be cloned. Finn and Jake cannot. James is, in the brutal ledger she keeps in her head, a replaceable life, and Finn is not. And so the math says James is the acceptable loss. She does the calculation, and she acts on it, and she does not agonize in the moment, because agonizing is a luxury the situation does not afford. It is the trolley problem with the lever pulled by someone who has clearly pulled it before. What makes this so uncomfortable is that she is, on her own terms, correct, and the show knows she is correct, and it refuses to comfort you about it. If you actually believe that some lives are more structurally important than others, that a hero who can save thousands is worth more than one citizen who can be remade from gum, then knocking out Finn and sending James is the right call, the responsible call, the call a serious leader makes, so that a sentimental hero does not throw away a valuable life on a noble impulse. And yet everything in you recoils from it, because James did not volunteer, James was not asked, James was spent, treated as inventory rather than as a person, his death decided for him by a ruler doing sums. The horror is not that her logic is broken. The horror is that her logic works, and that a working logic can still produce something monstrous, and that the distance between good governance and quiet atrocity can be as thin as the belief that people are numbers you are allowed to add and subtract. And then the series does something strange with it, something that makes the whole thing darker and lighter at the same time. In the follow-up episode, it is revealed that after James died, she cloned him, and that James, or a James, went on to die for the kingdom again, and again, many times over, sacrificing himself over and over in service of the Candy Kingdom, before she finally decided to stop cloning him and let him rest. So many deaths of the same person, authored by the same hand. On its face, that is one of the most chilling things she has ever done. A citizen reduced so completely to a resource that she prints new copies of him, specifically to die. But the twist underneath the twist is that the Jameses were never actually dying. The clones had figured out the game, and they had been faking their heroic deaths to collect medals and honors from her, gaming the very system that treated them as disposable. So the story hands her a strange kind of reprieve. The thing she thought she was doing, spending a life 25 times, was not really happening. The lives were preserving themselves behind her back. She is let off the hook by a technicality the story invents, but it never unshows you what her mind was willing to do. We watched her weigh it. We watched her be ready to spend him. The reprieve is for James. It is not for her conscience, and it is not for ours. If James is the abstract version of her utilitarian calculus, then there is a case that is far more concrete and, to me, far more chilling, because it involves a child, and it involves years, and it involves the specific decision to imprison an innocent for the safety of the world. When Flame Princess was an infant, dangerously powerful, her heat core capable under strong emotion of melting through the planet itself, it was Bubblegum who advised the Flame King on what to do with her, and the advice was containment. On Bubblegum's counsel, the infant Flame Princess was locked inside a lantern, and she stayed there, contained, for most of her childhood. Years and years, a whole youth spent caged, not because the child had done anything, but because of what the child might do, decided by Bubblegum's cost-benefit judgment that one person's freedom was an acceptable price for the safety of everyone else. It is her pragmatism applied to a life at its most vulnerable, and it is, for my money, the single most disturbing thing she is ever party to. More than James, because this time nothing undoes it. No clone and no reprieve waiting in the next episode. A real child lost her entire early life to a calculation, and the calculation was hers. You can construct the defense, and it is not nothing. The threat was real. A being that can melt the planet under emotional strain is not a hypothetical danger, it is an existential one, and a ruler responsible for millions of lives cannot simply hope for the best. If you take the survival of the world as the highest value, then the containment of one person, however tragic, is the correct and even the merciful choice, because the alternative is catastrophe. That is the argument, and it is a real argument, and the terrible thing about Bubblegum is that she is almost always making a real argument. She is not a cartoon villain doing evil for pleasure. She is a person applying a consistent moral framework, the framework that says the good of the many outweighs the good of the one, and following it exactly where it leads, and where it leads includes a child in a lantern for 14 years. The framework is coherent. The framework is also the kind of thing that, followed without a countervailing force, ends with innocents caged for the greater good, and a leader who has learned not to let their faces keep her up at night. She has words for this side of herself, and the series puts a self-justifying vocabulary in her mouth. Though I want to be careful about exact wording, so take the specific phrasing as the sentiment rather than a transcript. She describes herself, in essence, as a pragmatist. She invokes, in essence, the idea that the ends justify the means. These are not confessions of guilt. They are her creed stated plainly, the philosophy she governs by, offered without apology, because she does not, in these moments, believe she owes one. and that is what separates her from a leader who does hard things and hates herself for it. For long stretches of it, Bubblegum does not hate herself for it at all. She has made her peace with the arithmetic. She has decided that someone has to be willing to do the sums, to knock out the hero, to cage the child, to spend the citizen, because the sentimental refusal to ever sacrifice anyone is itself a kind of cowardice that gets everyone killed. Somebody has to be the adult in the room who is willing to be hated. She has appointed herself that person, and she has been that person for 800 years, and it has cost her more of her own softness than she probably knows. Here is my honest take on all of it, and it is the take that keeps me coming back to her. I do not think Adventure Time wants you to simply condemn her, and I do not think it wants you to simply excuse her either. I think it wants you to feel the pull of both at once, and never fully resolve it, because that unresolved pull is the actual truth about power. Someone does have to make these calls. The world does contain threats that cannot be wished away, and populations that cannot be kept safe by kindness alone, and a leader who refuses to ever weigh one life against many is not pure. They are just leaving the weighing to chance, or to someone crueler. Bubblegum is what it actually looks like to take that responsibility seriously, all the way down, without flinching. And it is monstrous, and it is necessary, and it is monstrous because it is necessary, and necessary in a way that still leaves a child in a lantern and a citizen in a grave. The reason she is one of the great characters in television animation is that she will not let you have a clean feeling about her, and neither will the series, and neither, if you are honest, will you. The same instinct that lets her spend a life on a calculation shows up in a gentler-looking form that is, in some ways, more insidious, because it does not require an emergency. It is just how she runs things every ordinary day. Princess Bubblegum watches her people, not metaphorically, not in the caring way a shepherd watches a flock, though she would frame it that way. She watches them with cameras and tracking chips and hidden monitors, and for a long time none of them know it. There is an episode called The Cooler where the extent of it comes out, and it is one of the more damning things the show ever does to its heroine, because it does not present her surveillance as the plot of a villain. It presents it as the accumulated habit of a ruler who has simply never questioned whether she has the right. She keeps a secret shed full of monitors. Inside Cinnamon Bun's face, she has planted a camera, using one of her own citizens as an unwitting recording device to spy on the affairs of another kingdom. Her people carry tracking chips she implanted in them. She surveils citizens who have no idea they are being recorded, and she has done it for so long that it does not even register to her as a thing that needs defending, until she is finally forced to say it out loud. When she is finally forced to say it out loud, the confession lands harder than any denial could, because she does not deny it. She admits, more or less plainly, that she spies on everybody, and in admitting it she concedes something that the whole shining image of her depends on hiding, which is that she is not the perfect, benevolent princess she has projected all these years. The mask slips, and what is under it is a security state with a crown, a benevolent one, run by someone who loves her people, but a security state nonetheless. What I find so effective about the way the show handles this is that it does not turn her into a tyrant in that moment. It just lets you see that the line between the good ruler and the surveillance state is not where you thought it was, that a person can love her people completely and watch them constantly and see no contradiction between the two, because in her mind they are the same act. To watch is to protect. To know everything is to be able to prevent everything. She surveils her citizens for exactly the same reason a frightened parent reads a child's messages, because she is terrified of what will happen to them if she looks away, and because somewhere underneath it, she does not fully trust them to survive their own freedom. This is the point where you have to bring in the thing about the candy people that the series is honest about, which is that she made them simple on purpose. Bubblegum regards her citizens as naive and childlike, and it is honest that she is not entirely wrong to, because they are, and she is the reason they are. She believes that left to themselves, without her guidance, they would quickly destroy themselves, and the writers give her enough evidence that you cannot dismiss the worry as pure arrogance. But the fragility she is protecting them from is fragility she engineered. She built them naive so they would be easy to protect and easy to govern, and then she uses their naivety as the justification for governing them so tightly, and the circle closes on itself. The surveillance is downstream of the paternalism, and the paternalism is downstream of the design, and the design was hers. She created a people she has to watch, and then watches them, because they are the kind of people who need watching. And at no point in that loop does anyone ask the candy people what they would prefer, because the entire premise is that they are not equipped to know. You can see how completely the impulse has fused with her genius if you notice that her surveillance and her inventiveness are, at bottom, the same drive wearing two costumes. There is a rescue story where she goes looking for Finn and Jake after they go missing, and it turns out she had planted a tracking device in Finn's ear, a little GPS she installed in her friend's body, so that she would always be able to find him. On the one hand, it saves his life. On the other hand, she put a tracker in a friend without, as far as we ever see, asking. For the same mission, she builds some kind of shock weapon and, as fans remember it, one of those gloriously named Adventure Time inventions, the sort of improvised science she can conjure on demand. And this is the thing I want you to really see. The control impulse and the inventor impulse are not two different sides of her, a good side and a bad side. They are one impulse. The mind that builds a machine to save you is the same mind that builds a machine to watch you, because both come from the conviction that she can engineer safety into the world, that the right device, the right protocol, the right piece of foresight can hold back the chaos. Her love expresses itself as engineering, and engineering, aimed at people, becomes control. There is no clean way to separate the bubblegum who invents wonders from the bubblegum who bugs her friends, because it is the same woman reaching for the same tools for the same reason. She is trying to make a world that cannot hurt the people she loves, and a world that cannot hurt them is, unavoidably, a world she has to control. The question the series keeps circling, without ever answering it cleanly, is whether this is still love. When your care for someone expresses itself as surveillance, as management, as the quiet removal of their ability to make their own mistakes, is that love? Or is it something that has curdled into a possessiveness that only calls itself love? Bubblegum truly, fiercely cares about her citizens. She would die for them, and she has arranged the entire architecture of her existence around their survival. And she also treats them as things to be managed, minds to be kept small, bodies to be tracked, a population to be optimized for safety at the cost of freedom. It does not let her off, but it also does not let you pretend the two things are unrelated, that the caring is the real her, and the controlling is a flaw bolted on. The controlling is how the caring comes out. That is the tragedy of a certain kind of love, the love of the powerful for the vulnerable, that it so easily becomes a cage built with the best of intentions, and that the person building the cage often cannot see the bars at all, because from the inside they look exactly like protection. What redeems this, and the show does eventually offer a redemption, is that she turns out to be capable of seeing the bars, which is more than most people who build cages ever manage. But she does not get there by being told. She gets there by being humbled, publicly and painfully, in the one way a benevolent dictator can actually be humbled, which is by the very people she has been protecting deciding, freely, that they do not want her. Before we get to that though, hold the picture of her at the height of her control, because it is important to see her at her most fortified before you watch it come down. A woman on a balcony above a city she built, watching all of it on a wall of secret monitors, loving every citizen and trusting none of them, certain that her vigilance is the only thing standing between her fragile people and the ruin the world is always threatening to bring back. She is not wrong that the ruin is real. She is wrong about what it costs to hold it back this way, and about who pays, and she is about to find out, at the ballot box of all places, that the people you keep small will eventually be too small to know they should keep you. The humbling comes in an election, and I think it is one of the great quiet gut punches of the whole series, because of how ordinary the mechanism is. No monster deposes her. No army takes the Candy Kingdom by force. There is a vote, an actual election, and she loses it. In the episode Hot Diggity Doom, the people of the Candy Kingdom are offered a choice between Princess Bubblegum, who has ruled and protected and loved them for centuries, and the King of Ooh, a transparent charlatan, a con man in a cheap costume that fans have long suspected was backed by shadier interests than he ever let on. And the candy people choose the con man. By a landslide, they pick the fraud over the woman who built them, and they do it freely, and there is nothing she can point to and call illegitimate, because it was a legal election and they simply preferred someone else. She did not even campaign, and the reason she did not campaign is a perfectly bubblegum one. She assumed they knew she loved them, that centuries of care spoke for themselves, that she did not need to sell herself to people she had spent her whole existence protecting, and she was wrong, and the wrongness cost her the kingdom. Watch what happens on her face in that moment, because it is not the anger you might expect. It is a specific, dawning horror, and it is aimed inward. She looks out at her citizens, at their blank, contented smiles, as they cheer for the man who is going to ruin them, and she understands something about them that she has spent centuries carefully not thinking about. They cannot tell the difference. They are not able to distinguish a good ruler from a bad one, cannot see the con, cannot weigh her love against his flattery, because they do not have the equipment to do it, and they do not have the equipment because she did not give it to them. She made them simple, made them naive and childlike and easy to protect, and in that moment the bill for that choice comes due, because a people made too simple to be dangerous are also a people made too simple to recognize who is actually keeping them safe. The very naivety she engineered for their protection is the thing that hands the kingdom to a swindler. She is undone, precisely and poetically, by her own design. And here is the moment that, for me, elevates her from a fascinating character to a truly tragic one. She does not rage at the people. She does not declare the election invalid and seize power back, though she almost certainly could. She takes off her crown, and she throws it down, and she walks away. She indicts herself. In the privacy of her own understanding, she recognizes that this is the fruit of what she built, that she has no one to blame but the ruler who decided her subjects should be children, and she accepts the verdict. She goes off to live in a small country cabin some fans trace back to her own family, with only Peppermint Butler for company, a deposed queen in exile from a kingdom that voted her out, and for a while she just stays there. It is one of the rare things in fiction, a powerful person confronted with the flaw in her own philosophy, who does not double down, who does not find a way to make it everyone else's fault, but who sits in the wreckage of her own logic and lets it be true. A benevolent dictator, undone by the naivety she manufactured for control, and honest enough, at least for a while, to admit that the undoing was earned. Now, I want to be careful not to make her sound more enlightened than she is, because the show is subtler than a simple redemption. She does eventually take the throne back, in a later crisis when the con man's incompetence and a genuine threat to Ooh make her leadership necessary again, and she does not exactly return chastened into a humble constitutional monarch. She is still bubblegum. She still believes, on some level, that she knows best. The humbling does not cure her of her certainty, but it does something to her, and you can trace the effect across the rest of the series, because after the election, after the surveillance backlash, after being forced to look directly at the gap between how much she loves her people and how little that entitles her to control them, she starts, slowly, to loosen her grip. The clearest concrete sign of it is that she dismantles her spy network. The secret monitors, the hidden cameras, the apparatus of watching everyone, she takes it down. The woman who could not imagine ruling without seeing everything decides, in the end, that she will have to try, that the price of all that watching was too high, that a people you truly want to protect are a people you eventually have to trust enough to stop surveilling. It is not a grand speech. It is a quiet correction, a woman putting down a tool she has held for centuries, and it is one of the wisest things the series ever lets a character do. I love that the arc works this way, because it refuses both of the easy stories. The easy cynical story would be that power never changes, that she learns nothing, that the surveillance state simply reasserts itself the moment she is back on the throne. The easy sentimental story would be that she has a single tearful epiphany and transforms overnight into a perfect democratic leader. The show does neither. It gives you a person who is really changed and still fundamentally herself, who has learned a real lesson and will still make hard calls, who dismantles the spy network but does not suddenly stop believing she is the smartest being in Ooh, because she is. Growth, in this show, is not becoming a different person. It is the same person carrying one hard truth she did not carry before, and letting it bend her, a little, in the direction of trust. She does not stop being a planner who thinks in decades. She just stops assuming that thinking in decades gives her the right to reach into every life around her and adjust it. There is a reading of the whole election arc that I find almost unbearably poignant when you connect it back to where she started, all those centuries ago, alone in the wasteland. She built the candy people because she was lonely. She made them simple, in part, so they would be safe, and in part, if we are honest about the psychology of it, so they would need her, so that she would never be alone again, so that there would always be a whole population depending on her care. And the election is the moment that whole strategy betrays her, because a people built to need you are not a people who can truly choose you. Their dependence was never love, it was just dependence. And when a flashier option came along, they went to it without a backward glance. Because you cannot engineer devotion, you can only engineer reliance. And reliance is not the same as being wanted. She made a world so that she would not be alone, and then, in a Candy Kingdom voting booth, that world showed her that manufactured company is its own kind of solitude. You can be surrounded by 1,000,000 people who depend on you completely, and still not have a single one who would choose you if they had the option. That is what the vote tells her. And I think it is a large part of why the story of her heart, the story we still have not fully told tonight, matters so much. Because there was exactly one person in all of Ooh who did not need her, who was every bit as old and powerful and unfragile as she was, who could have simply chosen her, freely, as an equal. And she pushed that person away for the sake of the kingdom that would one day vote her out. Before we get to the person who could have chosen her, I want to slow down on the thing that shapes how she loves anyone at all, which is time. Because whatever else Princess Bubblegum is, she is old in a way that is hard to hold in your head. Over 8 centuries. Long enough that she watched the world remake itself. Long enough that entire generations of the beings around her have been born, grown, and died, while she stayed more or less the same, pouring fresh biomass into the same recipe. And a person who lives like that develops a relationship with time that the rest of us, who get one short pass through it, can barely imagine. She plans in decades. She thinks in centuries. When she looks at a problem, she is not asking what it means this year. She is asking what it will mean long after everyone currently alive to worry about it is gone. That perspective is a gift, in a sense. It is why she can build something as patient and long-ranged as a civilization out of a wasteland. It is also a kind of curse, because when you live on that time scale, the individual mortal lives around you start to blur into something more like weather than like people, seasons that come and go, and it takes a real act of will to keep caring about a single fragile life when you know, from long experience, how briefly it will last and how many you have already lost. There is an episode called The Vault that opens a strange window onto how deep her thread runs through the history of Ooh, and it does it sideways, through Finn rather than through her directly. Under hypnosis, Finn is guided back through his past lives, the chain of beings he has been before he was Finn, and the sequence is one of the loveliest and eeriest bits of world building in the show. He was a comet, once, or something like one. He was a butterfly. He was a pink bubblegum-like substance, a detail that ties his lineage to her own strange material. And then, further along the chain, he was a person, a young woman named Shoko. And Shoko's story is where Bubblegum steps into the deep past of the show in a way that recolors everything. Shoko was a thief, and a wounded one, and I mean that literally. She had only one arm, because when she was a child her own parents sold her right arm, traded it away, in exchange for a computer. Let that sit as an image of the world she came from, a world so broken that a child's arm is worth a machine to the people who were supposed to protect her. Shoko grows up hard and alone, with a mechanical arm in place of the one that was sold, and she is hired to steal something precious, an amulet belonging to Princess Bubblegum. So she comes to the Candy Kingdom as an intruder, a criminal, sent to rob the princess. And what happens instead is that Shoko is injured, and Bubblegum takes her in and nurses her back to health, and the two of them, the ancient ruler and the one-armed thief, become friends. Real friends. For a little while, the Khan and the Mark become something like the family neither of them quite has. It is one of the tenderest relationships the series ever sketches, and it is between Bubblegum and a girl who came to steal from her. There is a small, devastating detail in the middle of it that tells you everything about her loneliness and her vanity at once. When Shoko asks her how old she is, Bubblegum lies. She says she is 19. Not 800, not even the 18 she usually claims, but 19. A specific little upward fib, the kind of thing a young person says when they want to seem a touch more grown than they are. Present-day Finn, watching this memory, actually calls it out, points out that she is something like a bazillion years old and is absolutely not 19. And it is played for a light laugh, but think about what it means. Here is this immortal being, centuries old, making a friend for what may be the first time in ages, and she cannot help shaving the truth, cannot help presenting herself as a peer, a girl of 19, rather than the ancient thing she actually is. She wants, so badly, to be met as an equal, as just another young woman, and not as the timeless queen everyone else sees. The lie is not really about age. It is about wanting to be ordinary with someone, just once. And it is the same wish, exactly, that will define the great love of her life. The wish to be loved as Bonnie, and not as the princess. The friendship ends the way things end in her long life, which is to say it ends, and she keeps living. Shoko dies, falling into toxic waste, and the amulet and the bond and the brief warmth of it all pass into the vast archive of things Bubblegum has outlived. But the series does something with it that I find deeply moving, and I have to say it as implication rather than statement, because that is how it leaves it. The chain of Finn's past lives means that Shoko, the thief who came to rob Bubblegum and stayed to love her, is reincarnated, eventually, as Finn. The boy hero who spends the whole series as Bubblegum's loyal friend and protector is, on the level of the soul the story proposes, the same essence as the one-armed girl she took in centuries ago. Finn's devotion to her is not new, it is old, older than he knows, a bond that has found its way back to her across lifetimes and forms. She does not consciously know this, and he does not either, but the audience is handed it, and once you have it, Finn's fierce protectiveness of her reads as the return of a love she thought she had buried in toxic waste 800 years ago. Nothing she loves is ever quite as gone as it looks. It comes back wearing new faces. That, I think, is the strange consolation buried inside her immortality, and it is worth holding on to as we move toward the saddest part of her story. She has lost so much. Anyone who lives 8 centuries loses almost everyone, watches the mortal lives around her flicker and go out while she reforms herself again and again out of the same pink gum. And the temptation, for a person like that, is to stop letting anyone in at all, to conclude that love is just a longer way of setting yourself up for loss, that the rational move, for an immortal, is to care about populations rather than persons, to love the kingdom in the abstract because the kingdom does not die the way a friend does. You can see her make exactly that calculation, over and over. It is the calculation underneath the surveillance, underneath the paternalism, underneath the arithmetic of James, the quiet decision that individual attachments are a luxury a ruler, with her responsibilities and her lifespan, cannot afford. And the reincarnation of Shoko is the show's gentle rebuttal to that calculation. It suggests that the love does not actually die, that it circles back, that the girl becomes the boy and the bond survives the body, and that the ancient closed-off queen is more surrounded by returning love than her defenses will let her believe. She spends centuries protecting herself from loss, and the one person she nursed back to health in the deep past walks back into her life as her best friend's sword arm, still, on some level, choosing her. If any of that is true, then her whole strategy of holding people at a distance to avoid the pain of losing them was not just cruel to them. It was a mistake, on its own terms, a defense against a loss that was never as final as she feared. And there is one relationship in her life where that mistake is not abstract at all, where she made exactly that choice, to protect herself and her kingdom by pushing love away, and where it cost her centuries with the one person who was never going to die on her. That person is Marceline, the vampire queen, more or less immortal herself, over 1,000 years old, the one being in who is on Bubblegum's timescale, who will not flicker out and die the way a candy citizen does, who could stand beside her across the centuries as a true equal. And their relationship is the emotional counterweight to everything cold and controlled about the princess, because Marceline is everything Bubblegum is not. Where Bubblegum plans, Marceline drifts. Where Bubblegum builds order, Marceline plays music. Where Bubblegum treats feeling as a variable to be managed, Marceline lives inside her feelings, writes them into songs, lets them show. For most of the show, their bond exists in a strange and charged register. Two people who clearly share a deep and complicated history, who bicker like exes, who cannot quite be in a room together without something old and unresolved crackling between them. And the show, for years, will not tell you plainly what they were to each other. It only lets you feel it. The single clearest moment in that long stretch of subtext comes in a Season 3 episode called What Was Missing, where Marceline, in the middle of an argument, sings a song directly at Bubblegum. The song is called I'm Just Your Problem, and it is not a subtle piece of writing. It is a raw, wounded, half-furious love song, the sound of someone who has been hurt by another person and cannot stop caring about them. Someone singing about not being able to say sorry and not knowing why they even want to. It reads, unmistakably, as a song about a breakup, about a romance that went wrong and left a scar, and it is aimed squarely at the pink princess standing in front of her. And the real-world story behind that song makes it even more affecting. It was written by Rebecca Sugar, then a storyboard artist on the show, who would later go on to create Steven Universe. Sugar wrote I'm Just Your Problem after one of her own breakups, drawing on her own heartbreak, and she has said it was hard for her to write, which you can hear in every line of it. The song is performed by Olivia Olson, Marceline's voice, and it carries a real ache because a real person poured a real wound into it. The subtext of the whole Bubblegum and Marceline relationship, the thing fans would come to call Bubline, was not an accident the audience imagined. It was built, deliberately and tenderly, and it was Rebecca Sugar more than anyone who built and nurtured that connection, a fact the showrunner Adam Muto has publicly credited her with. The love that lived in the gaps of this show was authored. Someone chose to put it there. And this is where the story stops being sweet and starts being a real piece of television history, because putting it there was not safe, and the industry pushed back on it in ways that are a little shocking to look at now. There was a web recap series that Frederator, the production company, ran alongside the series, and one episode of that recap discussed the romantic subtext between Bubblegum and Marceline in What Was Missing, openly. That recap was pulled. It was taken down from YouTube and from Frederator's own site, made to disappear, and by some accounts an employee at Frederator lost their job over it. Think about that for a second. Not a scene from the series itself, just a recap that talked about what a lot of viewers could plainly see, and it was enough to cost someone their job and get scrubbed from the internet. The executive producer, Fred Seibert, later offered a kind of mea culpa about the whole affair, saying that in trying to get its audience involved, they had gotten wrapped up in both fan conjecture and, in his words, spicy fan art, and had gone a little too far. He denied that Cartoon Network had censored the episode itself in a panic. But whatever the exact internal story was, the shape of it is unmistakable. In the early part of this decade, a beloved cartoon so much as suggesting that two of its female leads had once been in love was still dangerous enough that a company would rather erase the evidence and part with an employee than let the conversation stand. That climate is the reason the relationship lived in subtext for as long as it did. The writers and artists who cared about it, Sugar chief among them, kept building it into the margins, into songs and glances and shared objects, and the particular way two characters avoid each other, precisely because the margins were where it was allowed to exist. It could not be text, so it became the richest subtext in the series. And in a strange way, the suppression made it more powerful, because subtext demands that you lean in, that you read carefully, that you notice. A whole generation of viewers grew up learning to read this relationship the way you read a poem, in the spaces between what is said. And underneath all of it was a real romantic history the series would only gradually confirm, the history of two immortal women who had loved each other and lost each other, and the loss, when it is finally explained, turns out to be as bubblegum as anything that has ever happened. Because the breakup was not caused by a villain, there was no curse and no third party, nothing dramatic done to them from outside at all. What broke Bubblegum and Marceline apart was Bubblegum's work, her duty, her kingdom. In the deep backstory the show and its later chapters fill in, the two of them were together, and Bubblegum let the endless demands of building and defending her kingdom crowd Marceline out, chose the work over the person, again and again, until there was nothing left to choose. There is a specific version of this involving the Glass Kingdom and a dragon called Molto Larvo, where Bubblegum chooses to go and defend the kingdom, rather than be with Marceline, picks the responsibility over the relationship at exactly the moment the relationship needed her, and they do not reconcile for a very long time afterward. Centuries, in some tellings. Her defining flaw, the thing we have watched shape every part of her rule, duty over feeling, the kingdom before the individual, the many before the one, turns out to be the exact same flaw that cost her the great love of her life. She did to Marceline what she does to everyone, subordinated a person to the mission, and Marceline, unlike a candy citizen, was not willing to be governed. So she left, or they left each other. And Bubblegum went back to her lab and her monitors and her arithmetic and told herself, presumably, that it was the responsible thing, that a ruler cannot let a private happiness distract her from the survival of an entire people. It is the loneliest self-justification in her whole story, because the thing she sacrificed here was not a stranger or a citizen or a line on a whiteboard. It was the one person who saw the unroyal her and wanted her anyway, and she filed even that under acceptable losses. There is a real-world coda to this that I have to mention because it is one of those cases where the history of a cartoon and the story inside it rhyme. Olivia Olson, the actress who voices Marceline and who sang that heartbreaking song, once said out loud at a public event that the two characters used to date. Let me be exact about this because it gets misreported constantly. It was not said at some big fan convention panel, the way you will often hear it framed. It was at a Barnes & Noble book signing for the Adventure Time Encyclopedia in August of 2014, and she said that Pendleton Ward, the show's creator, had told her that Bubblegum and Marceline dated in the past. She later posted, and then deleted, a tweet joking that she likes to make things up at panels, which muddied the waters about how seriously to take it. So the honest way to hold it is this. An actress on it said the creator told her they had dated, then walked it back a little, and the series itself would not confirm the romance on screen for years yet. Even the people making it were negotiating, in public, in real time, how much of this love they were allowed to say plainly. The subtext was so carefully guarded that even a cast member stating it became a small controversy she had to partly retract. That is how much weight was sitting on a thing the writers could have simply shown, and eventually, at long last, would. I think this is the chapter of her life that recontextualizes everything else, and it is the reason her philosophy cannot just be a lecture about utilitarianism and surveillance, because all of that cold machinery, the arithmetic, the control, the duty, the many over the one, has a cost, and the cost has a name and a face and a bass guitar. Every time we admired her for being the adult in the room, for being willing to be hated, for making the hard call the sentimental hero could not make, we were also watching the exact temperament that drove away the person she loved most. Her greatest strength and her deepest wound are the same trait. The discipline that lets her rule is the discipline that left her alone at the top of a kingdom, on a balcony, watching everyone on her monitors and loved, truly, by almost no one who had a real choice in the matter. She spent centuries proving she could sacrifice anything for the greater good. Marceline was the proof she never wanted to give. And yet she kept the shirt. Remember the shirt from the very beginning of all this? The soft pink rock t-shirt folded away in her room? Here is where it comes back, and here is where the direction really matters, because people constantly reverse it. The shirt was Marceline's. In What Was Missing, back in Season 3, Marceline gave Bubblegum that rock t-shirt, and it became a small private treasure, a piece of the person she had lost that she could hold. And in a Season 5 episode called Sky Witch, we see what that shirt still means to her, years into their estrangement, when she is supposed to be nothing but the cold, rational queen who chose duty over love. Bubblegum is shown wearing it, keeping it, and in one moment that is almost too intimate to watch, she lifts it and smells it, breathes in what is left of Marceline on an old shirt. And this is the woman who claims to run on logic, who does arithmetic on lives, caught in the most human gesture there is, holding a piece of cloth to her face, because it still carries a trace of someone she misses. The part that gets me is what she does with it next. To recover Marceline's stolen music box, from the Sky Witch of the title, Bubblegum has to give up the object with the strongest emotional resonance she owns, and the object that qualifies, the thing that registers as most precious to her in the entire world, is that shirt. So she sacrifices it, She gives away the one relic she has of the person she pushed out of her life, in order to get back something that belonged to that same person. Her one piece of Marceline, traded away to help Marceline. And she does it quietly, unasked and uncredited, without Marceline even fully knowing the shape of what it cost her. That is the tell, the crack in the whole cold edifice. All the arithmetic, all the duty, all the many over the one, and underneath it she is a person who kept an ex's t-shirt for years, and smells it when she is alone, and would give it up in a heartbeat for the one who left it. The show does not need her to make a speech. It just shows you the shirt, and the smelling of it, and the sacrifice of it, and you understand that the woman who filed Marceline under acceptable losses never actually accepted the loss at all. She just could not find a way to be a queen and be in love at the same time, and so she buried the love and kept the shirt, which is the saddest possible compromise. The compromise of someone who has decided she cannot have the thing and refuses, entirely, to stop wanting it. The thaw between them, when it finally comes, does not come as a grand reunion. It comes as her falling apart, and Marceline being the one who is there. In a Season 7 episode called Varmints, Bubblegum, having lost the kingdom, stripped of the throne and the monitors and the whole apparatus of control that held her together, simply breaks down. The stress of it, the loss of the identity she had poured 8 centuries into, overwhelms her, and she melts, in a very bubblegum way, into a kind of collapse. And it is Marceline who comforts her. Not Finn, not Peppermint Butler, but the person she had spent centuries pushing away, Marceline. The person she pushed away is the person who shows up when the fortress finally falls, and there is something profound in the fact that Bubblegum could only really let Marceline back in once she had lost the thing she had always chosen over her. As long as she was the queen, the duty came first. It took losing the crown to make room for the person. The kingdom had to fall before she could reach for the hand she had let go of centuries earlier. From there, the series lets them find their way back, slowly, across the final seasons, until it arrives at a moment it had been dancing around for its entire run. In the series finale, Come Along With Me, with the whole world under threat and everything on the line, Bubblegum and Marceline kiss. On screen, plainly. Nothing to read between this time, just two women who love each other, finally doing the thing it had spent nearly a decade making you read between the lines to see. And the story of how that kiss got there is one of my favorite pieces of behind-the-scenes lore in all of television, because it very nearly did not happen on paper at all. The outline for the finale did not script a kiss. It only said, vaguely, that Bubblegum and Marceline should have a moment. That was it. Have a moment. It was, by most accounts, a storyboard artist who, given that vague instruction, drew the actual kiss, making the choice to turn have a moment into the defining romantic beat in the series. And when she did, the showrunner Adam Muto is said to have responded with little more than an enthusiastic "go for it. Come on!" exclamation point. That was the whole editorial process by which the most anticipated kiss in modern cartoon history became canon. A vague outline, an artist who decided to be brave, and a 2-word encouragement from her boss. After years of pulled recaps and fired employees and network nervousness, after all that fear, the thing itself came down to one storyboarder deciding, on her own, that it was time, and one showrunner cheering her on. The love that took the whole industry so long to allow was finally made real by 2 people deciding, without any more fear, to just do it. And then, remarkably, the show got to go back and tell the rest of it properly, which almost never happens. In 2020, 2 years after the series ended, a special called Obsidian arrived as part of Distant Lands, on HBO Max rather than on Cartoon Network, and it is a full-length reckoning with Bubblegum and Marceline as a couple, set years later, in the Glass Kingdom, the very place where it had all fallen apart. Obsidian goes back and fills in the breakup, the workaholism, the choice of duty over love, the long silence afterward, and it lets the 2 of them, older and scarred and wiser, actually talk about it, actually work through the thing that broke them. It gives the whole Bubbline arc the emotional spine the original series was only ever allowed to hint at. And there is something fitting, almost poetic, in the fact that it took a different platform, a streaming service in a changed world, to finally let this love be told at full volume. The story that had to live in subtext because a cable network in the early part of the decade could not quite allow it, got to become text, and then got to become an entire hour of television built around it, because the culture around it had shifted enough in a few short years to make room. Bubblegum spent centuries believing you have to choose between love and duty. It took the show itself the better part of a decade and a whole change in the world outside it to be allowed to say that she was wrong. What I find most moving about the resolution is that it does not fix her by making her stop being herself. She does not become warm and impulsive and free. She is still Bonnibel, still the planner, still the scientist, still the woman who thinks in decades and cannot fully stop managing the world. What changes is narrow and enormous at the same time. She lets one person all the way in. She allows herself the one attachment she had always classified as a luxury she could not afford, and in doing so she revises her entire moral system. Because a bubblegum who will not sacrifice Marceline again, who has decided that this one relationship is not on the table no matter what the arithmetic says, is a bubblegum who has admitted that pure utilitarianism was never the whole truth. There are some things you do not trade for the kingdom, or the greater good, or anything else. And learning which things those are, for her, is the entire journey. She had to lose almost everything to find the one thing she would refuse to lose again. The finale gives her one more test of that lesson, and it is worth walking through, because the way the series resolves her oldest conflict is not the way you would expect from a story about a warrior queen. The last great crisis of the series is framed, at first, as the Gum War, Bubblegum against her uncle Gumbald, who has been restored to himself and has come back at the head of an army to take the Candy Kingdom from her. It looks, going in, like the confrontation the whole series has been building toward, the maker against the creation who tried to erase her, family against family, and you brace for Bubblegum to win it the way she wins things, with superior planning and superior force, to finally defeat the uncle who has haunted her since the founding. And that is not what happens. It pulls a deliberate misdirect. The Gum War does not end in conquest. It does not end with Bubblegum crushing Gumbald in battle at all. It ends, instead, with a hallucination, a nightmare juice that forces the two of them into a shared dream, into a space where they have to actually confront each other and reconcile rather than simply fight. The oldest wound in her life, the family she made and lost and turned into furniture, is not healed by victory. It is healed, or at least addressed, by being forced to stop fighting long enough to feel it. For a character whose whole life has been the application of force and foresight to every problem, that is a remarkable place to land. The thing she could not fix by being the smartest and strongest being in the room gets fixed only when the fighting is taken off the table entirely. The war she was so fixated on turns out not to have been the real threat at all, which is the finale's larger point about her whole way of seeing. While Bubblegum and Gumbald are locked in their family grievance, the actual danger to all of existence arrives from somewhere else entirely. Golb, a being of pure chaos, the closest thing this world has to a god of unmaking, against whom all her planning and all her machines are more or less useless. It is a pointed thing for the show to do to her, to have her marshalling her forces for the war she understood, the political war, the war of kingdoms and armies and strategy, while the real catastrophe came from a direction her rationalism had no tools for at all. Chaos itself, the one thing she has spent 8 centuries trying to engineer out of her world, shows up at the end and cannot be reasoned with or calculated against or managed at all, and the resolution of that threat does not come from her at all. It comes from love and from sacrifice. From Betty, the woman who loved Simon, choosing to give herself up to stop Golb, merging with the Chaos God to defeat it. In the aftermath, Simon is restored to his human self, the Ice King undone, the ancient tragedy of that character finally resolved, though at the cost of the memories the crown had given him. The world is saved not by Bubblegum's arithmetic, but by an act of pure devotion, of exactly the kind her philosophy had always treated as sentiment. The planner does not save the world, love does, and she is there to see it. I want to correct a thing people often say about the end of the show, because it matters for how you read her and Marceline walking out of it. People say Marceline outlived everyone she loved, that the immortals are left alone at the end surrounded by the graves of everyone else. That is not what the finale shows. By the close of the original series, Simon is alive, restored to himself. Betty, as the merged being that stopped Golb, is not simply gone, and Bonnibel is right there, alive, beside Marceline, the two of them together at last. Marceline lost a great deal over her long life, as Bubblegum did. But the end of the story is not the two of them alone in an empty world. It is the opposite. It is the survivors, the ones who made it through the centuries and the wars and the long silences, standing together in a world that did not end. For two characters defined so much by loss, the finale is unexpectedly generous. It lets them keep each other. The world they are standing in, if you pull back to look at it, is a sad and strange and beautiful place, and the series never lets you forget the melancholy underneath the color. The ice crown that ruined Simon, that turned a kind man into the Ice King over 1,000 years, has an origin story told in an episode called Evergreen, and fans who track its production history say an early version of that backstory was set somewhere else entirely, a different take that was built out and then cut, reportedly shaped by a single artist working from an old graphic novel. Whole alternate histories of this world existed in the writer's room and were discarded. Even the great villain of it all, the Lich, the embodiment of the desire for extinction, carries that melancholy in his very name, because Lich is a real and ancient word, an Old English word for a corpse, a body, cousin to the German word for corpse, its root reaching back to an old sense of form or shape. And in a piece of behind-the-scenes lore I love, the Lich is said to have very nearly been called the Lich King, until the production company grew nervous about a trademark conflict with a certain enormous video game, and quietly dropped the king from the name, and by some accounts Pendleton Ward's first choice to voice that engine of death was, of all people, the musician Tom Waits, before the role went to Ron Perlman. Ooh is a world assembled out of 1,000 of these small choices and near misses and buried real-world roots, a post-apocalyptic fairy tale that is always a little sadder than it first appears, and Bubblegum is the person who chose to build joy in the middle of it anyway. That is the thing to hold on to about her, in the end, as the pieces of her philosophy settle. She is not, when you add it all up, primarily a tyrant, or a scientist, or a queen. She is a person who woke up alone in the ruins of a dead world and decided, against all the evidence, that it was worth trying to make something sweet out of it. Everything else, the control, the surveillance, the arithmetic, the paternalism, the pushing away of love, grows out of the terror that the sweetness she built might not last, that the ruin might come back, that the fragile people she made might be taken from her the way everything in this world is eventually taken. Her sins are the sins of someone trying too hard to hold a good thing together, and her growth, when it comes, is the slow and difficult discovery that you cannot hold a good thing together by force, that a world clutched too tightly stops being a world and becomes a cage, that the only way to actually keep the people you love is to loosen your grip enough to let them be free, and be watched a little less, and choose you or not choose you, and love you back on their own terms. She spends 8 centuries learning the one lesson her whole nature resists, which is that control is not the same as safety, and safety is not the same as love, and love, the real kind, only grows in the freedom she spent her life trying to engineer away. There is a reason so many people who write about this show reach for the word humanist, and it is worth ending on, because it is the frame that makes sense of all her contradictions at once. Adventure Time is a story with gods in it, chaos gods and death lords and the vague candy deity the citizens swear by, and yet the show never asks you to worship any of them. Its values are earthbound ones: curiosity, kindness, cleaning up your own messes, growing up, taking care of the people around you because they are worth taking care of, and for no other reason. It teaches science and empathy in the same breath, and mostly leaves heaven out of it. And Bubblegum is the purest expression of that outlook the show has, a being who built an entire moral order out of first principles, who decided what was right by reasoning about it, rather than by receiving it from on high, who looked at a dead and godless wasteland, and chose, with nothing to justify the choice but her own conviction, to make it good. That is a profoundly humanist act, to build meaning and care into a world that does not come with either, using nothing but your own mind and your own decision to try. Her failures are the failures of that project, the arrogance of thinking you can reason your way to the right answer about other people's lives, the coldness that a purely rational ethics can slide into when it forgets that people are not numbers. But her triumph is the same project, the sheer stubborn insistence that a broken world can be made kinder by someone willing to do the work, and that you do not need a god to tell you that a child should be cared for, or a people protected, or a person loved. You only need to decide it, and then live as though it were true. I think that is why she stays with people long after the show ends. Why she is one of the most argued about characters in modern animation, adored and indicted in the same breath. She is what it would actually look like if a real person, a brilliant, wounded, lonely, near immortal real person, tried to be good on purpose, at scale, for centuries, with no rulebook and no forgiveness, and no one above her to check her work. She would get it magnificently right and she would get it terribly wrong, often in the same decision, and she would keep going anyway, because the alternative, giving up on the sweetness and letting the ruin come back, was never something she could accept. She is a warning about the dangers of loving people by controlling them, and she is also proof of the beauty of trying to build something good in a world that gives you every reason not to bother. Both of those are her. You do not get the benevolent creator without the surveillance state, and you do not get the surveillance state without the terrified, tender child who just did not want to be alone. It is all one person, it always was. So, that is who Bonnibel Bubblegum is, as best as I can trace it. A rationalist who kept an ex's t-shirt and smelled it when she was alone. A utilitarian who learned there was one person she would never put on the scales. A benevolent dictator who was voted out by the very people she had made too simple to keep her and was honest enough to admit she had earned it. A maker of life who never learned to make a life of her own that was whole and carried that failure like a second crown. A woman who built a joyful pastel kingdom on the grave of the human race and ruled it for 800 years and learned, right at the very end, the one thing all her intelligence could not teach her, which is that you cannot hold the people you love in a closed hand. You have to open it and risk them leaving and hope they stay. And when Marceline finally stayed, it was not because Bubblegum had outplanned the situation or built the right machine or made the correct calculation. It was because, for once, she let go and trusted and allowed herself to simply be loved, which is the least scientific and most human thing she ever did. If you have stayed with me this long, and if your eyes have gone heavy somewhere in the middle of all this, then the night has done exactly what it was supposed to do, and there is nothing left for you to do but let it. Adventure Time will keep its place in the culture the way a few rare shows do. The ones that dressed themselves up as something silly for children and turned out, underneath, to be about grief and time and love and the enormous difficulty of being a good person in a world that makes it hard. It won a Peabody and a pile of Emmys, and it deserved them, but that is not why people keep coming back to it. People keep coming back because it told the truth, gently, in candy colors, about how much it costs to care for things that can be lost. And Bubblegum, the pink woman on the balcony with her monitors and her lab coat and her folded-away t-shirt, is the character who carried the heaviest share of that truth, the one who wanted, more than anything, to keep everyone safe forever, and who had to learn that the only way to love someone is to let them be free. Rest easy tonight knowing that even her, even the most guarded and rational heart in all of OOO, got there in the end. She put down the crown, and she opened her hand, and she let herself be happy. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.